everybody is just rushing forward headlessly. Where are the NCOs? Where are the officers guiding them, controlling the units, doing their best to keep people together? I'm Alexander Watson. I'm Professor of History at Goldsmiths, University of London. I'm an expert on the First World War. I've written 3 books, and today we're going to be looking at battle scenes in First World War movies to judge how real they are. In August 1914, cavalry plays quite an important role. We tend to think of the First World War as being entirely static, but it did start off very mobile. The Germans storm through Belgium and they occupy a large chunk of northeastern France. Some of the cavalry was equipped with swords. This was one of the things that they were trained to do. Key omission from how these British cavalrymen are presented is that none of them have rifles. And that's a big mistake, because while British cavalry were trained to charge like they're portrayed doing here, they were also trained to scout, and they were also trained to act as mounted infantry. So they would dismount and they would be able to defend a position or work round to the flank of a position. So they've got multiple roles, and that was actually what made them so useful. So this idea that the film is going to hammer into our heads that cavalry are obsolete at this point, it's actually not true. All right, so this is the point that everything gets ridiculous. But what they have done is they've taken their machine guns and they put them in a forest all aimed at their camp. And there are 6 machine guns here. 6 machine guns was the allowance for an entire German regiment in 1914. German regiment was around 3,000 men. So this is the number of machine guns that would be expected to support 3,000 men. In reality, in 1914, you had about 7 machine guns for every 2 kilometres of ground. You wouldn't have arranged 6 machine guns behind 3 trees. This is the literal definition of overkill. As a cavalryman, if you're confronted by an entire regiment's worth of machine guns, or even just one, which would be sufficient, why would you keep on charging towards it? That makes no sense. What you would do is you would veer off to the left or to the right. You would get into cover, there's plenty of forest here, and then you would use your training as mounted infantry to dismount and try and take these machine guns from the flank. Also as well, cavalry in a forest, if you charge into a forest on a horse, you're going to break the horse's legs. This is a really, really bad idea. 3 out of 10? This is a great opening. It's really good to see the smoke that they've got in no man's land. This is 1916. The French infantry are going into attack. In order to screen their infantry from machine gun fire, rifle fire, the French would lay smoke so that their troops could come forward without easily being seen and without easily being aimed at. And we've got an officer who is actually leading the men. This guy is desperately trying to maintain control of his troops, to guide them, to show which direction they need to go. It's great to see it, so often missed from First World War films. So the uniforms in this scene are very authentic, and what he's wearing on his head is an Adrian helmet. The French army was the first of the armies to introduce proper head protection for its troops. And that was because head injuries in the first year of the war were a really, really serious strain on manpower. And so having this head protection lowered injuries, lowered fatalities. It's a pretty light helmet. A bullet would penetrate it, but it would protect soldiers. It would protect soldiers from shrapnel. This is an Adrian helmet from the First World War. This is a medical corps helmet. The badges on the front were different depending on what arm the soldier belonged to. You can see this is a medical corps one because it's got a snake and a staff on it. Key thing is the ridge. The ridge, it turns out, was really useful for protecting against the airburst from shells, if you like, concussion. I don't think it was deliberate. I think they were basing it on a fire brigade helmet, but it turned out really, really well. So this attack is realistically portrayed too. The men are trying to keep spaced out, and that was really, really important. All armies told men, when you go forward, you need to keep space between you, because If you clumped together, then you presented a perfect target for a machine gun. So keeping spaced out was a really key aspect of survival. The other thing that you see these French soldiers doing is using the terrain for cover. They're going in and out of the dips in order to move forward and protect themselves from machine gun fire and the really violent-looking artillery fire that's coming down on them. The one thing that it misses, it's got the French infantry all armed with rifles. And by this point in the war, by mid-1916, the French had already developed a light machine gun. I'd give this an 8 out of 10. We don't think of watches as weapons of war, but they really, really were in the First World War. If you were going to have a successful attack by 1917, everything had to be synchronised. The first wave needed to go over together, followed then afterwards by the second wave, but above all, you needed to synchronise with the artillery behind you. That's something that a lot of filmmakers forget, that infantry didn't simply act on their own. They acted in combined arms with an artillery bombardment. So getting that timing right was really, really crucial. And we see that with the officer looking at his watch. That's a great start to the scene.
You can't possibly make it that way, man. You're bloody insane.
There is some historical context to this scene. The Battle of the Somme, huge battle, 500,000 casualties on both sides. Took place in the second half of 1916, and the Germans really suffered badly. And they decided to withdraw their lines back to stronger positions in early 1917. And the backstory here is that the British Army is pursuing them. This is a temporary trench, so that's why there aren't any sandbags. It's simply been dug to protect the assaulting troops. This is meant to take place on the Somme, or just beyond the Somme battlefield. And the ground there was really chalky. It was known to be white and chalky, and they've really represented that well in the film.
No, 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 no.
I never understand why he goes over the parapet. In a First World War trench, you've got kind of two mounds of earth, one behind it and one in front of it. The one in front of it is called the parapet. That's the one that soldiers will shoot over it. The other one is called the parados. And that was actually built slightly higher than the parapet. And the reason for that was that if a soldier put his head up over the parapet, and if there wasn't any earth behind him, then you'd have the horizon, he'd be easily seen. Now, there's going to be an attack, and all of these troops are going to go over the parapet. Why doesn't he just climb over the parados? There's nobody there. He could simply run unimpeded without any problems. He'd even get some cover from the guys going over the parapet. If you send your men forward without any artillery support, everybody is going to die. They didn't send men over like this. The guidelines that the army releases in early 1917 is that when you advance, you need to advance with the artillery. And you have what's called a creeping barrage. And what a creeping barrage was a line of shells which would pummel the ground in front of the infantry and move forward at set times. And they did that in order to clear no man's land of any defenders, so you need to be rid of them, and then moving into the trenches to keep the defenders' heads down, which you desperately needed to do if everyone wasn't going to be machine gunned to death. So by this point, April 1917, you're going to only go forward with a creeping barrage generally. You're not going to do it any other way, and that's just absent from here. Everybody is just rushing forward headlessly. If they actually get to the German lines, which they're clearly not going to do because they haven't got any artillery support, but what are they going to do once they're there? Where are the NCOs? Where are the officers guiding them, controlling the units, doing their best to keep people together? The helmets that they used were called Brody helmets, and they were above all designed to protect against shrapnel. Because if you think about the position that these soldiers are in, they're actually defended very well on either side by the trench itself. Trenches really were very effective at protecting soldiers. It's only when soldiers leave the trenches that they become extremely vulnerable. Where they are vulnerable, though, is on the top of their heads. And so that was why you had this kind of battle bowler type arrangement with hardened steel and the rim around it to protect the head above all. That was why they were designed like this. I'd give it a 4. You hear them shouting in German, to arms, and then this machine gun opens up. And that seems to me very, very plausible. And then they switch on a searchlight, which was pretty common on the Eastern Front. You'd have searchlights that you could switch on to illuminate the front of your defences. This is representing the so-called Christmas battles of early 1917. And this is a unit called the Latvian Riflemen. They were a nationalist Latvian unit that were raised and that served in the Imperial Russian Army, operating up on the north of the Eastern Front in what today is Latvia. And this was a really marshy area. So it wasn't possible to dig trenches in this area. This is the Eastern Front, this is different from the West. When the Germans took it in 1915, what they did was they built a long wall made of sand and wood, which they fortified. And you can see that really well. The other aspect of this scene that's authentic is that when the Latvian rifles attacked this part of the German line, they had to get through the barbed wire. You had to find a way without blowing the barbed wire up using artillery. They relied on surprise alone. They didn't have any artillery bombardment. And what we're seeing here is what the British Army would have called a Bangalore torpedo, which was like a pipe bomb. It was pushed underneath the wire, and then it had a fuse going back, and then you light it. And that's what these two guys are doing here. They've got these hardened metal plates in front of them to try and protect them from bullets, and it's their job to light the fuse, which will then send off the wire. You see this wave of riflemen coming out, disguised in snow camouflage. They would have been bed sheets or any white material that they could have got hold of. The other thing that's great about this clip is that it reminds us that the winter can actually be a point of really huge activity. If you want to take an area that's a marsh though, actually you can't do that for most of the year. The only point at which you can do it is when the marsh freezes over. And that's what happened in January 1917, and that was when these Latvian troops went forward and attacked this German line. They could suddenly get over the marsh. What you see is the main character, he's dropping to the ground, he's taking cover behind a corpse as the machine gun moves towards him, and then you see a line of soldiers falling one after the other, from right to left. And it's clear that the machine gun is traversing back away from him. And he leaps up and he moves to the left away from the machine gun's fire. And this is what gives him the opportunity to throw a hand grenade and destroy the gun. And it's a really neat way of showing how an experienced combat troop would be very alert to what was going on, to where the machine gun was firing. And veteran troops did learn ways how to deal with. It's part of the learning process that goes on in the First World War. It's just such a nice human detail that they've managed to get this far right to the wall, in part thanks to the snow because the marsh is frozen, but then they can't easily get up this slope because it's icy. And so they're using their bayonets as ice axes in order to carve some sort of foothold in it. You can see the desperation there. And it's just this tiny little detail that just makes this scene so totally plausible. I think this is fantastic. I give this a 10. So this clip portrays a fictional naval battle between a Russian destroyer and a German armoured cruiser in the Baltic Sea. What's hinted at in the clip, but what maybe doesn't come through as well as it could, is that these two ships are of a massively different size. There's literally nothing this Russian destroyer could have done to hurt this cruiser. Some of them were equipped with torpedoes, and that potentially could have done, but as becomes clear in this film, this particular ship is equipped with mines. So there really isn't any defence that this ship has got against the Friedrich Karl. The cruiser has multiple guns, but the biggest on it, 21 centimetres. If those 21 centimetres hit the Russian destroyer, it's going to sink, or at the very least it's going to have its infrastructure wiped off it. It's going to be a huge amount of damage. Huge German shell hits this gun tower, And it's not even that the gun tag goes down, the gun is still in working order. There's nothing realistic about this at all. You'd be very unlikely to have combat this close either. The German armoured cruiser would have destroyed the Russian ship before it got anywhere near it. It is true that the Friedrich Karl was sunk by a mine. If a German ship hit a mine, you would get an explosion, but down near the waterline. There would be no reason to have this huge explosion that they've produced on the bridge or on the deck. That's doesn't make any sense. There was an explosion, but it sank really, really slowly. It didn't explode in flames. And in the end, the Germans managed to rescue all but 8 people. This idea that there was a fight between a destroyer and the armed cruiser, that's not the case. I'll give it a 2. The battle itself is pure make-believe. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to see more videos in this series, click on the link above.